In the autumn of 1941, the German Kriegsmarine was ordered to deploy U-boats into the Mediterranean Sea for the first time to attack Allied naval power in the region. Over the next 2.5 years, more than 60 submarines would cross the Straits of Gibraltar into the most dangerous naval theatre of war on the planet. None of them would ever return. The idea of deploying U-boats to the Mediterranean came about in the summer of 1941, in response to increasing Allied pressure on Axis supplies flowing from Italy to North Africa. British air, submarine and destroyer striking forces were tearing into convoys bound for Libya. Supply deliveries to Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps had dropped from 125,000 tonnes in June to just 51,000 the following month, with supplies of petrol collapsing by 40% to just 12,000 tonnes. This was a serious problem, and one that Mussolini turned to his German allies for help with. Hitler agreed to send aid in August 1941, but was limited in what he could spare from the Eastern Front. The Luftwaffe's Fliegerkorps II was slated for transfer to the Med. These couldn't be sent until December, so Hitler turned to the Kriegsmarine, demanding that they offer up some assistance to the Italians. Since by this point the Kriegsmarine's surface fleet was either sunk or trapped in port somewhere, this could only be done with submarines. Admiral Dönitz, the head of the U-boat arm though, was not keen on the idea of transferring U-boats from the North Atlantic into the Mediterranean. He viewed it as a needless and unproductive distraction from the real task of sinking as much of Britain's Atlantic shipping as possible. So far in 1941, Dönitz's boats had been very successful at this. Over the first 6 months of the year, 345 Allied merchant ships had been sunk in the North Atlantic, an impressive feat for a fleet that only had 32 operational boats in June 1941. Admiral Dönitz was hoping to expand his assault on the transatlantic shipping as the year drew to a close, with dozens of new boats due to enter service and the number of operational boats due to rise to 65 by the end of September. But this wasn't to be. Despite initial protests, Dönitz was forced to transfer significant numbers of U-boats into the Mediterranean. The first to go was U-371 on September 21st. Making it into the Med meant creeping past the British-controlled Straits of Gibraltar. This was made easier by a strong current which flows from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean Sea, allowing U-boats transiting from west to east to do so without using their engines, minimising the detection risk. This was a problem if a submarine ever wanted to go the other way though, as the only way to push against the current would be to use its diesel engines and run on the surface, which would be shockingly risky. After a fraught few hours, U-371 did make it through, and she was followed by 31 other U-boats by the end of 1941. Initially, the U-boat Mediterranean adventure met with huge success. On November 13th, the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal was torpedoed and sunk by U-81, and 2 weeks later the battleship HMS Barham went the same way, holed by 4 torpedoes from U-331 before suffering a catastrophic magazine explosion. These high-profile successes were celebrated vigorously by the Germans, but it wasn't long before they began to pay their own price for operating in such a congested and shallow part of the world. Of the 32 boats which had attempted passage into the Med in 1941, by the end of the year 6 had failed at the first hurdle, being sunk or forced to abort their attempts to pass Gibraltar. 5 more had then made it in but also gone to the bottom. U-433 was sunk literally the day after it passed Gibraltar, and U-95 made it only 1 day more. It was a high price to pay for a deployment which was grounded more in the political need to support Italy rather than in any military logic. But these early losses didn't stop Hitler from doubling down. When the British launched a major offensive in North Africa, codenamed Operation Crusader, Rommel's forces were pushed back, losing Tobruk and falling back to El Agheila. Fearing that the Afrika Korps was about to be thrown out of Africa, Hitler declared an emergency, and the Kriegsmarine High Command increased the number of U-boats assigned to the Mediterranean to 50. This was infuriating to Dönitz, who was forced to watch as the Med became a seemingly endless drain of U-boats. His initial hopes that boats would be able to return to the Atlantic after a temporary deployment proved to be in vain, as it became clear that it would be basically impossible for U-boats to go back through the strait. Dönitz's frustration was well justified. Though deploying into the Med did carry a greater chance of sinking Allied warships, as the losses of Barham and Ark Royal demonstrated, they increased the risk to the U-boats themselves and came with little chance of sinking merchant ships. Over the last 3 months of 1941, just 12 merchant ships were sunk in the Med by the 30 or so boats committed to that area, while in the North Atlantic a similar number of boats sent 52 merchantmen to the bottom. This number itself was a steep drop from the numbers that were being sunk in the summer. Now, this decline was due to a variety of different factors, including more escorts becoming available as 1941 progressed, but in some part it was due to a large proportion of U-boats being sent into the Mediterranean. The Royal Navy's official historian called it a most welcome easement in this vital theatre. And the Kriegsmarine's commitment to this theatre did not stop after 1941. Through 1942, another 17 boats crossed through Gibraltar, joined by 12 more in 1943, and remarkably 12 more as late as 1944, long after the Mediterranean had become totally dominated by the Allies. They achieved some successes. Through to the end of the war, 168 merchant ships were sunk in this part of the world, joined by more notable warship sinkings, including the carrier Eagle during Operation Pedestal in August 1942, and the light cruisers Galatea, Hermione, Naiad, Newfoundland, and Penelope. But the price of this was huge. The average life expectancy of a U-boat entering the Mediterranean was just 8 months. 15 boats never even made it to a month inside the Med before they were sunk. It was a part of the world crawling with Allied air and sea forces, and with nowhere for a submarine to hide. One by one, the U-boats met with their demise. By July 1944, only 11 were left when the Allies overran the port of Toulon, and most of the remaining ones were scuttled. The last U-boat standing was U-565, which had been based at Salamis in Greece and was subject to 2 air attacks on September 19th and 24th, which seriously damaged it. With no other options, the U-boat was scuttled, ending the German submarine presence in the Mediterranean after 3 years and 10 days. It had been a disastrous diversion for the Kriegsmarine. It neutered the main anti-shipping effort at a critical time in the Battle of the Atlantic, just at the time when it looked like the Germans were consistently getting the upper hand. The Battle of the Atlantic was the decisive theatre of World War II in my view, and to divert so many U-boats away from it at such a critical time was a serious misstep, and for little strategic gain in the Mediterranean. The U-boat force was unable to seriously affect Allied shipping or prevent attacks on Axis shipping, and what damage it did do was massively eclipsed by the Luftwaffe, which inflicted serious pain and came this close to forcing the island of Malta to surrender in the summer of 1942. If you want to know more about that, there is a video on the Operation Pedestal convoy which you can watch over on the Historigraph channel. Of 62 U-boats that entered the Mediterranean during the war, none of them survived. It was an exceptionally dangerous area to operate in, even by the standards of the U-boat force, a branch which saw 75% of its strength killed by the war's end. In next week's video, I'm going to look at one of the U-boat's rare successes in the Med, and one of the most dramatic ends to a ship's life ever captured on film: the sinking of HMS Barham. Make sure you're subscribed and have the notifications turned on so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.